Standing in my living room that Tuesday evening, helping Jake with algebra homework, I had no idea the next 60 seconds would change everything. My phone buzzed on the coffee table with a notification from our family group chat, and when I read Dad's message, my chest tightened. Finalized New Year Bahamas resort booking. Confirmed 8 people total. Me, Linda, Brian, Kelly, Tyler, and Sophie. Resort's group package maxes at 8. Can't add more without losing the group rate. Flying out December 30th, back January 3rd. Can't wait, I counted on my fingers. My parents, 2. Brian's family, 4 more. That's 6. Plus his 2 kids, Tyler and Sophie, makes 8 total. My family of 4 wasn't mentioned at all. 8 plus 4 equals 12, but they'd stopped at 8. Sarah walked over from the kitchen, saw my face, and I handed her the phone without speaking. I watched her expression change as she read it, the same progression I'd just experienced. Emma ran in from the kitchen, flour on her nose. "Daddy, the cookies are almost ready." She stopped when she saw our faces. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart," I lied, but Jake had already seen the screen. "Is that about Grandpa's trip?" he asked carefully. Emma's eyes lit up. "Are we going to the beach with Grandpa?" The question hung in the air like smoke. How do you tell your 7-year-old she wasn't invited to a family vacation? "Grandpa's trip is for Uncle Brian's family this time," I said slowly. Emma's face fell. "Why can't we go?" Jake, who'd been doing his own math, spoke up with devastating clarity. "But Grandpa, Grandma, Uncle Brian, Aunt Kelly, Tyler, Sophie, that's only 6 people, plus us is 10. So they chose Tyler and Sophie over us?" He wasn't being accusatory, just factual. But somehow that made it worse. My 10-year-old son had just articulated what I'd been trying not to think. They had chosen. After the kids went to bed, I sat alone in my office and opened our family group chat history, scrolling back to October. I needed to understand when this decision had been made and how we'd been so thoroughly excluded from the planning. October 15th. Brian's message. "Mom, Dad, been thinking about New Year. Kids have been through a lot with the career transition. Would love to do something special. Found a Bahamas resort deal, about $4,500 per person. But that's more than we can swing right now." The ask was implicit but clear. October 18th, Dad had responded, "Brian, your mom and I want to help make this happen. Consider it an early Christmas gift for Tyler and Sophie. $4,500 times 4 people. $18,000 my parents were spending on Brian's family." October 22nd, Mom's message. "Just talked to the resort. They have a group package for 6 to 8 people. Why don't your dad and I come too? Make it a real family trip." And that's where someone should have said my name. Should have asked if we wanted to come. Should have looked at 10-person packages instead of 8. But nobody had mentioned us. The conversation had just continued without us, like we didn't exist. I kept scrolling through weeks of planning messages I'd never seen, watching my family get excited about a trip I'd only just learned about. Nobody ever asked if we had plans. We simply didn't exist in this narrative. But something else was bothering me. Brian's career transition excuse. I opened LinkedIn and found his profile, started scrolling through recent posts. December 10th. Photo at a hotel ballroom networking event. Building relationships and growing the business. December 3rd. Expensive steak dinner. Closed a promising partnership today. November 28th. Sports bar premium seating. Work hard, play hard, go Pats. I switched to Instagram. His Corvette on December 14th. Sunday drive therapy. Harbor cruise. December 7th. Ended the week right. Career transition. Tough times. Can't afford a vacation. Yet somehow Brian could afford networking events, steak dinners, premium sports seating, maintaining a Corvette, and weekend harbor cruises. The math only worked if you added one variable. Our parents were funding everything. I opened the Excel file I'd been keeping for a year. Family Interactions 2023-2024.xlsx. 2 years of documented patterns. Thanksgiving 2023. Dad said too stressed to host us. Week later, hosted Brian's family. When I'd called about it, he said Brian's oven had broken. Later learned that was a lie. Easter 2024. Mom asked me to buy Tyler a $300 Easter basket. I sent a $50 gift card. Her response: "That's all? You make six figures, Marcus." Jake's 10th birthday, June 12th. Dad had a work conflict, couldn't come. That same day, he drove 2 hours to Tyler's soccer tournament. August. Brian asked to borrow $15,000. I requested a business plan first. He ghosted me. Dad called saying I was making things difficult for family. The pattern was undeniable. Brian's needs first. Always. His kids were the priority. Always. And my family was perpetually in second place, expected to understand and not make waves. Over the next week, I watched the family group chat explode with excitement while I stayed silent. Wednesday, Brian posted, "Tyler watching sea turtle videos nonstop." Mom replied, "Packing sunscreen for our grandbabies." Friday, Kelly shared a photo of Tyler and Sophie in new swimsuits. Mom's response: "My beautiful grandbabies. Can't wait to see them splash." Monday, Brian wrote, "T-7 days. Mom, got sand buckets, floaties, snorkel sets. Anything for Tyler and Sophie." Anything for Tyler and Sophie. I read that sitting in my car at work, feeling something cold spread through my chest. That evening, Emma walked past my office while I was staring at my phone. "Daddy, are you okay?" I closed the phone immediately. "Just work stuff, sweetheart." But the problem wasn't work. The problem was that her grandparents were planning an elaborate vacation for her cousins and couldn't even mention her name. Tuesday, Christmas Eve, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Mom sent me a private text. "Marcus, honey, could you water our plants while we're in Bahamas? Key under the mat? You're such a lifesaver. Have a nice quiet week at home." Have a nice quiet week at home. She assumed I'd be available, assumed I had nothing better to do, never asked if I had plans. She just decided. I typed back, "Sure, Mom." Sent it. Put the phone down. Then I sat in silence for 5 minutes, feeling something shift inside me, something cold and clear and certain. I picked up my phone again and searched. Luxury Dubai resorts, New Year packages. 10 minutes later, Sarah walked into my office and stopped when she saw my laptop screen. I turned it so she could see. Burj Al Arab Jumeirah, Dubai. New Year's family package. December 30th through January 4th. 2-bedroom suite. Kids Club. Ski Dubai. Desert Safari. NYE Gala. Total cost: $18,500. Sarah sat down slowly. "Marcus, they're spending $18,000 on Brian's family," I said calmly. "For a vacation he can't afford, that our kids weren't invited to." "This is about revenge," Sarah said, testing the words. "No, this is about showing Jake and Emma they matter, about teaching them their worth doesn't depend on someone else's arbitrary decision about who gets included." We'd left it there that night, both needing time to think. But Christmas evening, after the kids were asleep, we found ourselves at the kitchen table with the laptop open between us. "Walk me through this one more time," Sarah said, and I heard in her voice that she was seriously considering it. $4,500 per person times 4 people. That's $18,000 Dad's paying for Brian. Meanwhile, we have $87,000 in savings. We make $230,000 combined annual income. We're stable. We've been saving responsibly for years, and we weren't invited. Sarah pulled the laptop closer, reading through the package details. What's included? 2-bedroom suite, 5 nights, kids club, ski Dubai, indoor skiing in the desert, desert safari, New Year's Eve gala with Burj Khalifa fireworks, private beach, butler service. Jake's been asking when we can go on a real vacation, Sarah said softly. Emma still talks about how Grandma promised her a beach trip someday 2 years ago. This isn't a beach, I said, but it's better. Are you going to tell your parents before we go? No, they didn't ask if we had plans. They assumed. I'm letting them keep assuming. That's... Sarah searched for the word. Fair, she finished, and I saw a small smile. They taught you about priorities. You learned. She looked at the screen one more time. Our kids deserve this. Not because it's expensive, but because we're choosing them first. I moved the cursor to reserve now, hovering there, giving us both one last chance to back away. My phone buzzed. Text from Dad. Marcus, we're leaving Sunday morning. Plant key under the mat. Thanks for helping out while we're making family memories in the Bahamas. Making family memories. I looked at Sarah. She looked at me. Book it, she said, steel in her voice. I clicked the button. The confirmation page appeared. Your extraordinary Dubai experience awaits. Reservation confirmed. I screenshotted it, saved it to my phone, and closed the laptop. I didn't reply to Dad's text. Dad had taught me that family comes first. He'd taught me about priorities and loyalty and showing up for the people you love. He'd just never specified which family he meant. And I'd just chosen mine. The morning after Christmas, I sat Jake and Emma down at the breakfast table with Sarah beside me, and I watched their faces change from curious to stunned to absolutely ecstatic in the span of about 90 seconds. We had a surprise, I told them, a trip for New Year, and when I said the word Dubai, Jake's face went blank with confusion because he had no idea where that was or why it mattered. Sarah pulled up photos on her phone, and that's when everything shifted. The Burj Khalifa appeared on the screen, this impossible needle of glass and steel rising into the sky, and Jake's eyes went wide. That's the tallest building in the world, Sarah explained. We're going there. Then she swiped to the next photo, an indoor ski slope with actual snow and penguins, and both kids erupted simultaneously with a single word that came out like a shout. Penguins! The explanation tumbled out quickly after that. 14-hour flight. Middle East. Desert city with indoor skiing and beaches and the tallest building humanity had ever constructed. Jake kept asking questions faster than we could answer them, and Emma was already planning what stuffed animals she'd bring, but then Emma stopped mid-sentence and asked the question I'd been dreading. Can we tell Grandpa and Grandma? I exchanged a quick glance with Sarah before answering. Not yet, sweetheart. This is our family's special surprise, just for us. Why not? Emma pressed. Because 7-year-olds don't understand adult complications, don't grasp the politics of silence and exclusion and calculated responses. Because this is something we're doing together, just the 4 of us, Sarah said gently, and I heard her choosing each word with care. Jake, who'd been quiet during this exchange, spoke up with a question that showed he understood more than Emma did. So we get our own trip? Like, our own family vacation? Yes, I confirmed, and I watched something settle in his face, some understanding that this wasn't just a vacation. This was a statement, though he probably couldn't articulate exactly what kind of statement it was. The next day we went shopping, and I found myself in kids' clothing stores and outdoor gear shops in a way I hadn't in years. Because usually we were careful with money. Usually we compared prices and waited for sales and made practical choices. But that afternoon, when Emma held up a sundress and asked if she could get it, Sarah told her to get 2, and Emma's face lit up like we'd just given her the world. At checkout, the total came to $287 for clothes we'd wear for 1 week, and I handed over my credit card without even looking at the receipt, without doing the mental math I usually did about cost per wear, or whether we could find it cheaper online. The sales clerk had asked if we were planning somewhere warm, and when I said Dubai, her face had shown that specific kind of impressed surprise that made me realize we were doing something unusual, something worth being impressed by. Jake had immediately jumped in with enthusiasm. We're going skiing, with penguins. The clerk had laughed and said something about Ski Dubai being incredible, and in that moment, watching my son's excitement about telling a stranger our plans, I felt certain we'd made the right choice. On the drive home, Emma declared it the best surprise ever, and Jake asked one more time if he could tell Grandma, a question I deflected by saying he could tell her after we got there, which seemed to satisfy him even as I knew the real answer was more complicated than that. While we were shopping and planning and packing, the family group chat was exploding with messages I read but never responded to. Saturday morning started early with Mom's message about one more sleep, followed immediately by Brian saying Tyler hadn't slept at all from excitement. The messages came in waves throughout the day, each one a small reminder of the vacation I wasn't invited to, the family memories being planned without us. By afternoon, Brian had posted a photo of their suitcases and beach toys, all packed and ready. And Mom had commented about how spoiled Tyler and Sophie were, though she'd said it with obvious pride rather than criticism. Dad had chimed in with that classic grandparent line about spoiling being what grandparents are for, and I'd read it sitting in my living room while my own kids played upstairs, wondering if he'd ever felt that way about Jake and Emma. Evening brought more of the same. Kelly announced the kids had finally fallen asleep after being too excited to rest. Mom said she might not sleep either. Brian thanked our parents again, said it meant everything, and nobody in that entire thread of 19 messages mentioned my name or my family or acknowledged our absence in any way. Sarah had found me staring at my phone that evening and asked if I was okay, and I'd said yes. And when she'd asked if I was sure about what we were doing, I'd said completely, and I'd meant it. Every message in that group chat, every excited update about Tyler and Sophie, every grandbaby's comment that excluded my children, it all reinforced that we were making the right choice. That night, at 10 o'clock when I should have been sleeping before our early morning departure, Mom sent me a private text with plant watering instructions. She'd left them on the kitchen counter, she said, and I should stop by twice while they were gone. And she ended the message by telling me to have a nice, quiet week at home, like it was already decided, like she'd looked into the future and seen me sitting in my house with nothing better to do than take care of her orchids. I typed back 7 words. Have a great trip, Mom. I didn't correct her assumption. I didn't mention Dubai or flights or hotels shaped like sails. I just sent those 7 words and put my phone down and felt something settle in my chest, cold and certain and absolutely calm. 24 hours later, we were gone. The alarm went off at 4:30 Sunday morning, and the house was still dark when I started loading suitcases into the SUV. Jake and Emma were sleepy but too excited to complain, bundled into the back seat with travel pillows and blankets, and Sarah drove while I sat in the passenger seat watching Boston wake up around us, knowing that by the time the sun fully rose, we'd be in the air. Logan International at 5:30 in the morning had that strange, quiet energy of people going places, everyone moving with purpose through the terminal. The Emirates check-in counter processed our passports efficiently, and when the agent saw our destination, she'd smiled that professional smile that somehow seemed genuine. Dubai for New Year. You're going to love it. Business class is confirmed. Gate C42. The boarding passes she handed us had gold Emirates logos, and the kids each received amenity kits that they immediately opened, finding sleep masks and socks and coloring books and little toiletries that made them feel like adults getting special treatment. By 6:45, we were in the Emirates Premium Lounge, Jake and Emma at the play area, while Sarah read a magazine and I stood by the windows watching the massive A380 aircraft being prepared for our flight. That's when I took the photo, Jake and Emma silhouetted against the window with the plane's distinctive tail visible behind them, and sunrise painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I'd written the caption carefully. Starting a new adventure. Teaching my kids that family creates its own traditions. Hashtags for family first and Dubai. I'd hovered over the post button for a moment, giving myself one last chance to back out, and Sarah had walked up behind me and asked if I was really doing this. They posted 19 updates about beach trips, I'd said. 19 messages about how excited they were, how special it would be, how much the grandbabies would love it. This is just one post, just one photo of my kids. I'd hit post, made sure the privacy was set to public, and then immediately switched my phone to airplane mode. Sarah had asked if I was going to watch the reactions come in, and I'd told her not for 14 hours because whatever was happening in the family group chat, whatever messages were being sent and panic was setting in, I didn't need to see it until we were already in Dubai, until the decision was irrevocable and complete. The flight itself was everything the website had promised and more. Business class pods that turned into flatbeds, flight attendants who gave the kids pajamas and slippers and stuffed camels to keep. Emma had asked with genuine disbelief if she got to keep the camel, like this might be some kind of trick, and when the attendant confirmed it was hers, Emma had held it like treasure. Jake had discovered his seat converted to a bed and declared it the best plane ever. After takeoff came meal service with ice cream sundaes for the kids, and when they learned the entertainment system had over 1,000 movies, their excitement had reached a new pitch that made other passengers smile at their enthusiasm. Mid-flight, with Jake and Emma asleep in their lie-flat seats and Sarah dozing beside me, I found myself unable to rest. My mind kept playing out what was probably happening in Nassau right now. My family landing, checking into their resort, someone seeing my Instagram post, the realization spreading that I wasn't home watering plants, that I'd taken my own family on vacation without telling anyone. I turned off airplane mode. The phone connected to Wi-Fi, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the notifications started, a cascade of them, 62 text messages and 29 missed calls, and Instagram going absolutely wild with comments and reactions. I scrolled through the texts chronologically, watching the panic unfold in real time. Mom at 9:15. Marcus, where are you going? Casual, curious, maybe thinking I'd posted an old photo or was talking about future plans. Mom at 9:30, all caps. Marcus, answer your phone. Less casual now, worry creeping in. Dad at 9:45, direct and angry. Call me immediately. Brian at 10, profanity included. Are you damn serious right now? Mom at 10:30, the realization fully hitting. You're supposed to be watching our house. Dad at 11:15. We need to talk now. Brian at noon, making it about himself. Way to ruin our family vacation. There were more, dozens more, variations on the theme of shock and anger and betrayal, and I read through all of them with that same cold calm I'd been feeling since Christmas night. Sarah had woken up, seen me reading, and asked how bad it was. About what I expected, I told her, which was true. I'd known this would cause an explosion. That had been part of the point. Are you going to respond? Not until we land, I'd said, and I'd switch the phone back to airplane mode and put it away, because whatever they were feeling right now, whatever panic or anger or hurt was spreading through their Bahamas vacation, they'd have to sit with it for another 6 hours until we touched down in Dubai. I looked over at Jake and Emma, both sleeping peacefully with their stuffed camels tucked under their arms, their faces relaxed and happy, and I felt that cold certainty again. They didn't know about the text messages or the family drama or the statement their parents were making. They just knew they were going somewhere special, somewhere they'd been chosen for, somewhere that made them feel valued and important and first. Somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, 35,000 feet up and 7 hours from our destination, my family back in the Bahamas was discovering I wasn't home, wasn't available, wasn't sitting quietly waiting for them to return. They were learning that exclusion has consequences, that silence can be an answer, that when you don't invite someone to your table, they might just build their own. And I was teaching my kids a lesson my dad had never intended, one about priorities and choices and what it means when you decide who matters most. When you're not invited to the table, you don't beg for a chair. You build your own table. You create your own traditions. You choose your own family, even when that family is the one you already have, the one that's been waiting all along to be chosen first. The plane descended through darkness toward Dubai, and I watched Jake and Emma pressed against their windows as the city revealed itself below us like some kind of circuit board come to life. The skyline sprawled in every direction, highways lit like glowing arteries, and then the Burj Khalifa appeared, this impossible spike of light rising from the desert, LED displays cascading down its sides in patterns that shifted and changed. Emma's face was pure wonder when she turned to me and said it looked like a spaceship city, and I realized she wasn't wrong. Immigration processed our passports efficiently, stamps landing on fresh pages, and when we emerged into the arrivals hall, a driver in a crisp white shirt held a sign with our name and the hotel logo. The drive from the airport took 30 minutes along Sheikh Zayed Road, 8 lanes of highway flanked by skyscrapers that seemed to compete for attention, each one wrapped in LED screens showing advertisements and art and patterns that made the whole city feel alive. Then we turned onto a causeway extending into the Persian Gulf, and the Burj Al Arab appeared ahead of us, that distinctive sail shape I'd seen in photos, but which looked completely different in person, gold and purple lights illuminating its white structure, and Emma asked with genuine disbelief if that was really our hotel. The driver had smiled in the rearview mirror and told us it was the most luxurious hotel in the world, and I'd watched my kids' faces as they processed that information, as they realized this wasn't just a vacation, this was something extraordinary. A man in traditional white kandura greeted us in the lobby with the kind of bow that made it clear this wasn't a normal check-in process. He'd introduced himself as Rashid, our personal butler for the duration of our stay, and when I'd repeated those words back to him with a question in my voice, he'd simply said, Of course, like having a butler was the most natural thing in the world. The private elevator rose to the 18th floor and opened directly into our suite. 2,200 square feet of space that made our entire first floor at home look modest by comparison. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the Persian Gulf stretching to the horizon, lights from Dubai's coastline visible in the distance. The kids' room had custom bunk beds and a PlayStation 5 already set up. The master bedroom had a balcony overlooking the water, and the marble bathroom was larger than most hotel rooms I'd stayed in, with a jacuzzi that could fit our whole family. Emma had stopped in the middle of the living room, spinning slowly to take it all in, and asked if this was really our room. Rashid had gently corrected her, explaining this was our suite, and Jake had run to the windows and shouted that he could see the ocean, and Sarah had stood beside me and whispered that this was beyond anything she'd imagined. I'd told her our kids deserved to feel special, and I'd meant it. But standing there in that suite with the city lights below us and my family's faces showing pure joy, I'd also felt the weight of what we were doing, the statement we were making, the consequences that were probably already unfolding thousands of miles away. I'd turned my phone off since the flight, keeping it dark and silent while we explored Dubai. But that evening, after the kids had finally crashed from exhaustion and jet lag, I'd powered it on in the bathroom with the door closed. The messages had flooded in immediately, a cascade of notifications that made the phone buzz continuously for almost 30 seconds. Dad at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, all caps. Marcus, where are you? Mom, 15 minutes later. Please tell me you're not in Dubai. Brian at 1:30. You're unbelievable. Dad again at 1:45, threatening to call the police if I didn't respond immediately, which made me actually laugh because what exactly would he report? That his adult son had gone on vacation without permission. I'd shown Sarah the messages, and she'd asked if I was going to call them, and I'd told her tomorrow, because whatever conversation we needed to have could wait until I'd had a full night's sleep and the kids had experienced at least one full day of this trip. I had a different plan for tomorrow morning, and it didn't involve defensive phone calls with my father. The restaurant was called Al Muntaha, which Rashid explained meant the highest in Arabic, and it was located 200 meters above sea level with views that stretched across the Palm Jumeirah and the entire Dubai coastline. Jake and Emma had been stunned into temporary silence by the floor-to-ceiling windows and the way you could see the curvature of the artificial archipelago below us. The French toast arrived with a dusting of what looked like gold glitter, and Jake had poked it suspiciously before asking if the syrup really had gold in it. I'd confirmed it was actual 24-karat gold flakes, edible and completely unnecessary and exactly the kind of excess that made this place what it was. Emma had giggled and declared she was eating gold, and I'd taken a photo of both of them with their golden breakfast and the dramatic window view behind them. The caption had written itself. Breakfast views in Dubai. Teaching the kids they're worth their weight in gold. Sometimes the best family traditions are the ones you create yourself. I'd posted it public, tagged the location, and within 5 minutes had 47 likes and comments from extended family I hadn't heard from in months. Aunt Carol, my mom's sister who'd always been the reasonable one, had commented with enthusiasm about how incredible it looked. Cousin Jennifer wanted to know how we'd ended up in Dubai. Uncle Rob called the Burj Al Arab a bucket list hotel and told me good for us. The support from the extended family was immediate and genuine, and I'd felt something shift in the narrative, felt the story becoming less about my nuclear family's drama and more about something larger. 10 minutes after I posted, my phone rang with Dad's number, and I'd answered it on speaker with the volume low so the kids wouldn't hear, and Sarah had moved closer to listen. His voice had come through tight with anger, asking if I had any idea what I'd done, and I'd kept my voice calm and asked how the Bahamas was treating him. The question had derailed him for a moment before he'd pivoted to demanding where I was and what I was doing there, and I'd given him simple, factual answers that seemed to make him angrier. Dubai. Vacation. Our neighbor Linda was handling the plants. He'd tried to tell me that Mom had assumed I'd be home, and I'd pointed out that she'd assumed without asking, the same way he'd assumed I didn't have New Year plans when he'd booked a trip that excluded my family. That had triggered the space constraints excuse, which gave me the opening I needed. I'd asked if they were really space constraints or priority constraints, and when he'd asked what that meant, I'd laid out the math. 8-person package. Our family of 10. They could have looked at larger packages but chose not to, and when he'd protested that those were more expensive, I'd mentioned our trip cost $18,500, so clearly money wasn't actually the issue. The silence on the other end had lasted maybe 3 seconds before he'd pivoted to calling my behavior inappropriate, saying I was flaunting luxury while Brian struggled. And I'd calmly asked what exactly Brian was struggling with given his social media showed client meetings and expensive dinners. Dad had defended it as networking, and I'd asked with whose money, and the conversation had spiraled from there. He'd insisted this wasn't about Brian, and I'd agreed it was about priorities. He'd claimed they hadn't excluded us, and I'd walked him through the logic of booking for 8 when we were 10. He'd said we should have understood, and I'd told him understanding doesn't mean accepting, and then he'd made the mistake that gave me exactly what I needed. He'd demanded to know why I hadn't told them I was going somewhere, why I hadn't asked if they wanted to come with us, and the absurdity of the question had hung in the air for a moment before I'd asked him to clarify. He'd actually said I should have asked if they wanted to join my trip, and I'd repeated it back to him slowly, making sure I understood correctly, that he thought I should have invited them to a vacation they didn't know I was taking. That's when I delivered the line I'd been building toward, the one that mirrored his own logic back at him. I didn't exclude you, Dad. I just didn't include you. There's a difference. The silence had been longer this time, and when he'd protested that it was the same thing, I'd asked if that was his logic for the Bahamas, and he'd tried to insist it was completely different. I'd asked how. He'd said Brian needed the trip, and I'd countered that my kids needed to feel valued, and we'd both made choices based on our priorities. He'd called me childish, and I'd told him maybe I was, but at least Jake and Emma wouldn't spend their childhood wondering why Grandpa didn't love them. He'd said that wasn't fair, and I'd agreed that excluding them wasn't fair either, and he'd declared we'd be having a serious conversation when they got back, and I'd told him I looked forward to it before hanging up. Sarah had looked at me for a long moment after I'd ended the call, and I'd seen something in her expression that was part concern and part pride, and she'd said one word: brutal. I'd told her it was necessary, and she hadn't disagreed. That afternoon we'd gone to Ski Dubai, which remained one of the most surreal experiences I'd ever had. Walking from 100-degree heat outside into a climate-controlled ski slope where actual snow fell from the ceiling and penguins waddled around in a specially designed enclosure. Emma had been enchanted by the penguins, kneeling down to let one investigate her boot while I'd filmed the whole thing, her whispering to Mr. Waddles like they were sharing secrets. Jake had taken to skiing with unexpected natural ability, making it down the bunny slope without falling, while the instructor praised his balance, and I'd taken a photo of him at the bottom with his arms raised in victory and posted it with a caption about moments you can't put a price on, then added in parentheses that we had anyway, which made Sarah laugh when she read it. New Year's Eve arrived with that particular energy that comes with anticipated celebrations, and by 6 p.m. we were all dressed in formal wear, Emma in a gold dress that made her look suddenly older, Jake in a little suit that he'd initially protested but now wore with obvious pride, Sarah in an evening gown that took my breath away, and me in a tuxedo I'd rented specifically for this night. I'd taken a family photo in the suite with the Burj Khalifa visible through the window behind us, the city lights creating a backdrop that looked almost unreal, and then I'd sat down to write the caption that would serve as our final statement for this trip. It had taken me 10 minutes and 3 complete rewrites before I'd landed on something that felt right. The post had talked about what this year had taught me, about family being defined not by blood, but by who shows up for you, by who makes you a priority instead of an afterthought. I'd mentioned my kids asking why they weren't invited, and me telling them we don't wait for invitations, we create our own magic. I'd thanked Sarah for believing in this and told Jake and Emma they were valued and loved and enough. And I'd ended with a line for everyone watching about worth not being determined by someone else's exclusion. Sarah had read it over my shoulder and predicted it would explode, and I'd acknowledged that was probably true, and when she'd said my family would lose their minds, I'd pointed out they already had. So what was one more post? I'd hit the button and watched it go live, our family photo and my carefully chosen words now public and permanent. 2 hours later we were at the Skyview bar with countdown clocks visible, and the Burj Khalifa lit up across the water, fireworks crews visible on the observation decks preparing for midnight. Jake and Emma had sparkling cider and champagne flutes, and Sarah and I had the real thing, and Emma had declared this the best New Year ever, with the kind of certainty only 7-year-olds can muster. My phone had been buzzing in my pocket for 20 minutes straight, notifications piling up as family and friends and people I barely remembered from high school responded to the post, and Sarah had asked if I was going to check it, and I'd told her tomorrow. Whatever was happening in that digital space could wait until after midnight, until after we'd counted down together and watched the fireworks and marked this moment as ours. The countdown had started with the whole bar joining in, voices calling out numbers in multiple languages, and Emma had insisted we count with everyone, so we did, our voices joining the chorus. 10, 9, 8, getting louder with each number. 7, 6, 5, Emma's voice rising above the crowd. 4, 3, 2. Marcus looking at his family, all of them smiling and happy and valued, exactly what he'd hoped for. 1. Happy New Year burst from hundreds of throats simultaneously, and the fireworks began, gold and silver explosions cascading down the Burj Khalifa in patterns that seemed choreographed to the music playing through the speakers. My phone continued vibrating in my pocket with messages I wouldn't read until tomorrow, reactions I didn't need to see right now, family drama that could wait while I stood with my actual family and watched the sky light up over Dubai. Dad had taught me that family means sacrifice, and he'd been right about that, I realized. He'd just never specified what you should be willing to sacrifice or who you should be willing to sacrifice it for. I'd chosen to sacrifice his approval, his comfort, his assumptions about my availability and compliance. I'd traded his peace of mind for my kids' happiness, his family vacation harmony for my children's sense of being valued and chosen and loved first. Fair trade. We landed at Logan on Friday afternoon, Jake and Emma exhausted but glowing with that specific radiance that comes from having experienced something extraordinary. Jake wore his new Burj Khalifa t-shirt and asked when we could go back before we'd even cleared customs. Emma clutched Mr. Waddles, the stuffed camel from the flight, and wanted to know if he could come to school for show and tell on Monday. By 5:30 we were home, the house exactly as we'd left it, plants watered and healthy thanks to our neighbor Linda. My phone showed 57 new messages and 33 missed calls, and I scrolled through them while Sarah unpacked suitcases and the kids distributed their souvenirs around the living room like claiming territory. Dad's message was direct. They landed tomorrow at 10, would be at our house by 11, and we needed to talk. Mom's was more pleading, asking for a face-to-face conversation to work through everything. Brian's dripped with resentment, thanking me sarcastically for making their vacation about me. But there was also one from Aunt Carol telling me not to let them guilt me, which I screenshot and saved. Sarah had looked up from the suitcase she was unpacking and asked if I was ready for tomorrow at 11, and I'd said I had 18 hours to prepare, which wasn't nearly enough time but would have to do. They arrived exactly on time, Dad and Mom standing on our doorstep with Bahamas tans and stress lines that hadn't been there before the trip. We'd sent Jake and Emma to Sarah's mother's house because whatever conversation was about to happen wasn't something they needed to witness or carry with them afterward. The living room became a standoff, them on the couch and us in armchairs facing them, Dubai souvenirs visible on the side table like evidence of a crime. Dad started by bringing up my Instagram post, the one about blood not meaning family, and asking how I could make them look like terrible parents to everyone we knew. I'd pointed out that I hadn't mentioned them by name, and Mom had dissolved into tears talking about phone calls from relatives, about Aunt Carol and Uncle Rob and Cousin Jen all asking questions, all implying that maybe there was favoritism in how they treated their grandchildren. When Mom said that Jen had told her it was about time someone stood up to them, I'd agreed quietly that Jen wasn't wrong. That's when Dad had stood up, anger finally breaking through, demanding to know how I dared accuse them of not being supportive. I'd started listing dates and events, each one a data point in a pattern they'd been denying. Jake's birthday in June when Dad had work, but actually went to Tyler's tournament. Thanksgiving 2023 when they were too stressed to host us, but hosted Brian the following week. Easter when Mom had demanded I buy an expensive gift for Tyler and called me selfish when I didn't spend enough. Dad had tried to defend each incident individually, but I'd kept going, adding them up, showing how they formed a pattern that was impossible to deny when you looked at it all together. He'd called me selfish, said this Dubai trip proved it, and I'd asked what the difference was between me spending $18,000 on my family and him spending $18,000 on Brian's. The front door had opened then without a knock, and Brian and Kelly had walked in like they owned the place. Brian had started with an insult, calling me Mr. Big Shot, and I'd calmly pointed out that I hadn't known they were invited to this conversation. Dad had said we were handling it as family, which apparently now included Brian and Kelly but had excluded my kids from the Bahamas trip. Brian had attacked the money issue, incredulous that I'd spent so much to make a point, and I'd turned it back on him by asking about the disconnect between his claims of financial struggle and his social media posts showing expensive networking events and harbor cruises. When he'd tried to explain it as business networking, I'd asked him to name a single client. He'd stammered about confidentiality, but we both knew he had no clients, no business, just parents who kept funding a lifestyle he couldn't afford. Kelly had accused me of investigating them, and I'd clarified that I'd simply looked at public posts they'd chosen to share with the world. Mom had tried to redirect by saying this wasn't about money, and I'd disagreed, saying it had always been about money, about resources, about who got priority and who got leftovers. I'd pulled out printed copies of the timeline I'd been keeping, 2 years of documented interactions, and I'd started reading through the pattern. Each incident on its own could be explained away, but taken together they showed unmistakable favoritism. Brian's needs always came first. His children were always the priority, and mine were treated like backups, like secondary grandchildren who only mattered when the primary ones weren't available. Mom had been crying through most of this, insisting it wasn't true, but then I'd said the thing that made her sob outright. Emma had asked me why Grandma didn't love her as much as Tyler and Sophie. She'd asked at 7 years old, in that direct way children have before they learn to hide their hurt, and I still didn't have a good answer for her. Dad had tried to regain control by demanding an apology, saying I'd embarrassed the family with my Instagram posts and needed to delete them and make this right. I'd refused, saying I wouldn't apologize for showing my kids they mattered, for teaching them their worth wasn't dependent on someone else's approval. Brian had accused me of tearing the family apart, which had made me laugh without humor. I'd asked where he'd been for Jake's school play, for Emma's dance recital, for any of the moments that mattered to my kids. I'd brought up Christmas when Mom had sent Tyler $200 in gifts and Emma a $20 gift card, and Mom had said she didn't remember that, proving my point that she didn't pay attention to my children at all. Dad had delivered an ultimatum then, telling me to delete the post and apologize, or I wouldn't be part of the family anymore. The words had hung in the air for a moment, and I'd been about to respond when Sarah had stood up, her voice clear and firm. She'd told them that if that was the choice, we'd choose not being part of this family. She'd talked about how Jake and Emma had the best week of their lives in Dubai, how they'd felt valued and important, how Emma had said she wished every day could be like that, not because of the luxury but because she'd felt like she mattered. Sarah had said that if they couldn't see how their behavior had consequences, we didn't need this kind of family in our lives. I'd stood then too, and I'd told Dad that he'd been right about family coming first. I just chose to prioritize my family, Sarah and Jake and Emma, over his comfort or approval. I'd said he'd taught me that priorities matter, and I was prioritizing my children's emotional health. They were welcome to be part of our lives, but on equal terms, no more favoritism, no more excuses. Dad had told me I was making a huge mistake, and I'd agreed I might be, but it was my mistake to make. I'd opened the front door, making it clear the conversation was over. And when Mom had tried to plead with me, I told her gently that I loved her, but I loved my kids more, and I wouldn't let them grow up thinking they were second-class grandchildren. They'd left slowly, Mom crying, Dad silent with anger, Brian glaring at me like I'd personally wronged him. When the door closed behind them, Sarah had asked if I was okay, and I'd realized with some surprise that I was, that I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying weight I didn't realize was there until I'd set it down. 3 months passed before things started to shift. Dad and I didn't speak for 6 weeks, a silence that felt both necessary and painful. Then Mom had called saying she'd been thinking about Emma's question, about why the trips and attention weren't equal, and she'd admitted she didn't have a good answer that justified the imbalance. Week 8, Dad had called with something that wasn't quite an apology but was close enough for him. He'd said maybe they should have handled things differently, which was his way of admitting fault without using the words, "I'm sorry." I'd accepted it because I knew that was as close as he'd get. Brian maintained radio silence, but through Aunt Carol I'd heard he'd finally gotten a job, entry-level marketing at $45,000 a year, and Dad had cut off the monthly payments that had been supporting his family. Apparently, tough love worked in both directions when properly applied. Week 12, Mom had asked if she could take Jake and Emma to the zoo. Just them, without Tyler or Sophie, without making it a group grandchildren event. I'd said yes, and she'd spent the whole day with them individually, and Emma had come home glowing, saying Grandma had told her she was special. Small steps, but steps in the right direction. Sarah and I had booked Tokyo for spring break. Just our family, another international trip that we'd invite my parents to, and they'd decline, saying they needed time to think about things. That was fine. We didn't need their participation to create memories with our kids. Sitting at my laptop one April evening with Jake and Emma looking over my shoulder, I was creating a photo album from the Dubai trip, selecting the best images and organizing them into a story about choosing your family and creating your own traditions. Jake had asked if we could really go back next year, and I'd told him absolutely that we were making it a tradition. Emma had asked if Grandma and Grandpa could come, and I'd paused before answering honestly. Maybe, I'd said, if they could remember that she and Jake were just as important as their cousins. Emma had asked what would happen if they didn't remember, and I'd told her that we'd have an amazing trip anyway, that our happiness didn't depend on anyone else's approval or participation. She'd nodded, satisfied with that answer in the way that showed she was learning the lesson I'd been trying to teach. That worth comes from within, from the people who choose you and prioritize you, not from chasing validation from people who've already shown you where their priorities lie. I'd saved the album with the file name ourfamilytraditions.pdf, the word our, in all caps for emphasis, because Dad had wanted to teach me about family obligations and he'd succeeded, just not in the way he'd intended. I'd learned that sometimes loving your kids means setting boundaries with everyone else, including your own parents. I'd learned that financial stability isn't a reason to accept emotional poverty, that you can afford to both save responsibly and spend on experiences that matter. And I'd learned that the best revenge isn't cruelty or retaliation or making people hurt the way they hurt you. The best revenge is living well, choosing joy, prioritizing the people who matter, and yes, posting about it publicly so that everyone can see what happens when you decide your children's happiness matters more than keeping peace with people who've shown you repeatedly that you're not their priority. We were going back to Dubai next New Year. This time it was tradition.